This video is sponsored by Simplisafe. There's no safe like Simplisafe. The oldest confirmed date in the Conjurverse takes us back as far as 500 BCE, with the first known depiction of Charon, or the ferryman, a Greek deity responsible for transporting the souls of the dead to the afterlife across a body of water. A few centuries later, in 20 BCE, the first documentation of the demon Malthus would be discovered in the form of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Malthus would eventually possess the Annabelle doll. It would be nearly another 5 centuries, in 500 CE, when the first known appearance of Valak would take place. Valak would become infamous in 1952 when the demon would escape the Abbey of St. Carta, taking on many forms, but most notably that of an evil nun. Malthus and Valak would play a much more significant role in the Conjurverse as two of the most powerful inhuman entities in the world. While the early documentation of demons and spirits might not seem significant, going back to the very beginning allows us to lay out the complete timeline, better understand the lore, and answer the burning questions that fans have always wondered about in the Conjurverse. To learn everything that happens in the Conjurverse and how James Wan's own official timeline is wrong, stick around to the end of this video. The Conjurverse timeline is a dense one because there are so many demons and spirits who make appearances throughout. While some are recurring and more notable than others, such as the previously mentioned Malthus and Valak, there are numerous more who make an impact and affect the timeline of events, such as La Llorona, Bathsheba, Isla Kastner, and Bill Wilkins. It might be one of the most lore-rich cinematic universes thanks to the deep lineup of demons and spirits that have backstories that go back further than the movies themselves, oftentimes stretching back hundreds of years before the films take place.
When we were making the first Conjuring, it became very apparent to us that they could be a bigger universe. So many other great stories that would be awesome to look into from a cinematic point of view.
This is because the Conjuring films claim to be based on true stories. I've dunked on that claim many times in the past, because how could there be a true story about ghosts and demons? It doesn't make sense, and no amount of angry retorts in my comment section are gonna change that. But what sets the Conjuring franchise apart from its sister series, Insidious, is the fact that they are based on real-world folklore. Again, that doesn't mean there's really a ghostly werewolf or shape-shifting children's toy out there threatening people's lives, but urban legends and tall tales have a place in our society for a reason, usually to tell a lesson of morality to a younger generation. The Conjuring films are an extension of this. Instead of a campfire tale or creepy character found in an old book, audiences get to enjoy a $40 million movie. So because the folklore behind these monsters comes from our world, there is a lot more information than meets the eye when it comes to the history of the Conjurverse. I featured several of these ancillary demons, witches, and characters in other horror history episodes, but in order to fully understand how they impact the overall sequence of events in the Conjurverse, we have to take it back to the source of the demonic lore. If there's one central item that ties the lore of the Conjurverse together, I think it would be this book found in Annabelle called The Devil's Welcome. In the book, there's a long-lost piece called The Curses of Belial. Belial is thought to be the devil personified, and there's mention of other demons working under him, such as Malthus, and later, Valak.
Valak, the defiler, the profane, the marquis of snakes.
Yes, that Valak. During this time period, the Duke of St. Carta was feared by the people and was known for practicing witchcraft. He summoned Valak from the dungeons of his castle, where he painted the grounds with a serpentine symbol representing the fearsome entity. However, Valak was abruptly stopped as the church charged in and stopped the liturgy. They were able to stop the Duke and seal Valak in using a holy relic, or holy grail, that contained the blood of Christ. However, many blessings and rituals would be required to keep the seal intact, and it would not last forever. But for now, we'll skip ahead to the 1400s, when a book was written called the Stregheria. The Stregheria is an early form of witchcraft originating from Italy. It's really a form of early paganism and an offshoot of Wicca, according to several sources. One thing we know for certain within the Conjurverse lore is that
the church used it to identify and persecute witchcraft.
While a first instinct might be to assume that this persecution would be during the Salem witch trials, this actually wouldn't make much sense, as the Stregheria is an Italian literature, and the fear of witchcraft had existed for centuries. While the Stregheria was mostly just a religious text, it does contain curses and information about them. Moving ahead a few centuries, in 1673 in Mexico, a young woman was stricken with heartbreak and jealousy after discovering that the father of her children was with another woman. In a fit of pain, she drowned her own kids in a river. Immediately shocked and appalled at what she'd done, she took her own life just thereafter, starting what is known as the Curse of La Llorona. I should note that the Curse of La Llorona's director, Michael Chavez, has since come out to say that the film is not part of the Conjuring universe, the reason being that it didn't include one of the key producers, which is Peter Safran. And I think that that's just total BS, and they're just trying to distance themselves from La Llorona because it didn't perform as well as the others. Chavez tried to say that when the movie was presented at South by Southwest, the presenter accidentally called it a Conjuring movie. But come on, that's not why we think it's a Conjuring movie. It's a Conjuring movie because Annabelle is in the movie, and Father Perez, a recurring character who you'll see in this timeline, is also in the movie. There's no arguing that this is not part of the universe. So with that settled, why was La Llorona's story turned into legend? During the 15th century, colonists from Spain would often come to Mexico to have affairs with indigenous women. It was not uncommon for these men to have children with them, then later reconnect with their wives and take the children with, leaving the indigenous women with nothing but collective anger and sadness. When La Llorona drowned her children, her real goal was to deprive the father of the ability to take them away from her. Shortly after, she realized the horror of what she had done, but what happened next would cement her status for generations to come. Alright, who's ready for scary story time? Sometime last year, I was working at a video at 1:57 a.m., I hear a noise and I see my deadbolt unlocked from the outside. I have a high-tech locking system, but apparently even those can be opened with the right tools. So this guy walks in. He was clearly surprised to see me coming towards him, and he said something about having the wrong address, which doesn't really make sense, and he closed the door and got out of there fast. 2 lessons were learned that day. The guy learned not to break into the home of a YouTuber who doesn't sleep, and I learned that it's time to step up my security system. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Simplisafe. Simplisafe offers comprehensive security for your entire home, including advanced sensors and cameras to detect threats and 24/7 professional monitoring so Simplisafe agents can jump into action and dispatch first responders even if you're unable to respond. Their agents will act within 5 seconds of receiving an alarm signal. The system is easy to install on your own, which is what I did, but they also offer professional installation if that's what you prefer. It's easy to arm or disarm your system from the app, access camera feeds, or even lock or unlock your front door remotely. Simplisafe was named among the best home security systems of 2024 by US News and World Report. That's 5 years running. It was even ranked the best customer service of 2024 in home security by Newsweek, so you know that they'll treat you right. Professional monitoring plans are available for less than $1 a day, less than half the cost of traditional security systems. You can save 20% on your system, and your first month is free when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring at simplisafe.com/CZsWorld. Again, that's 20% off your security system plus 1 month of free protection by signing up at the link simplisafe.com/CZsWorld. And remember, there's no safe like Simplisafe. It's said that La Llorona's ghost would haunt the rivers of Central America, with her echoed cries becoming synonymous with the Curse of La Llorona, or the Curse of the Weeping Woman. Just a few decades later, and about 2,500 miles northeast, a different type of execution ceremony would be held, the famous witch trials of Salem, Massachusetts. During this time, many people would be accused of witchcraft and killed. One of these people would be Marytown Estey, who would eventually be known as the ancestor of a demented witch, Bathsheba. But before we get to Bathsheba, there's another publication of note in the early 17th century when the Lesser Key of Solomon was written. The in-universe version of the Lesser Key of Solomon seems to be this book I mentioned earlier, The Devil's Welcome. The book is divided up into several sections, the first of which is called Ars Goetia, a conjurer's guide to summoning demons for personal gain. Ars Goetia describes a hierarchy of 72 demons. There are kings, dukes, princes, marquises, knights, presidents, and earls. Malthus is considered an earl of hell, and Valak a president. While both demons already existed by this point, the compilation of Lesser Key would make the information about them more accessible than before. No longer was Malthus's legacy just some text on a scroll of paper hidden inside a cave shrine. And this wider notoriety led to the formation of a group that would follow and worship Malthus. They called themselves the Disciples of Ram. But they weren't the only ones who came to worship a dark, unholy force. In 1812, Bathsheba Thayer was born, and at the age of 32, on March 10, 1844, she married Judson Sherman in Connecticut. But what Judson probably didn't realize when he walked down the aisle was that Bathsheba was a worshiper of Satan and practitioner of witchcraft. The couple moved to Harrisville, Rhode Island in 1863, where Judson bought 200 acres of land to build a farmhouse on. For the next few years, Bathsheba and Judson lived a seemingly normal life, until Bathsheba got pregnant. The baby was born in 1870, but just 1 week later, Judson discovered her sacrificing the baby to Satan in front of their fireplace. This is not the kind of hot meal a man likes to come home to. As soon as Bathsheba was caught, she grabbed a rope, or at least I assume she did, and hung herself in a large tree near the lake at the edge of their property, using her final words to curse anyone who'd try to take her land. And that's who we have to thank for the ever iconic Conjuring tree. Let's give it up for the tree. It would take some time before anyone tried to move onto this property, but in the meantime, the ferryman, who I mentioned at the beginning of this video, would make himself known. Based on the case files that would later be collected on the ferryman, it would appear that he took a slew of victims in the early 1900s. I feel confident saying that based on how they're dressed, as if they lived in the later Victorian era. The only recorded date from the Warrens case file is March 1921. The photo is just of some kind of witch's totem, and it's not exactly clear how this is tied in with the ferryman, but it is clearly a part of his file and backs up my evidence that he was active during the early part of the century. And that basically wraps up what I refer to in my head as the era of monsters. The next few decades would see the birth of many of our human characters, so I tend to call this section the era of humans. And the first two entries on this era of the timeline might be two of our most significant. In 1930 or 1931, Ed Warren and Lorraine Rayat Moran, who we'd later known as Lorraine Warren, were born. These two would go on to be maybe the most famous demonologists ever known. I calculated their in-universe birth dates based on the fact that they were both stated to be 17 when they first met in 1948. In real life, they were both born a bit earlier, September 7, 1926 for Ed, and January 31st, 1927 for Lorraine. On March 2nd, 1930, Lorraine's cousin, Irene Palmer, was born. Both Irene and Lorraine were gifted with the power of psychic visions, eventually discovering a talent for communicating with the dead. This ability goes back through the girl's shared bloodline to Saint Lucy, the patron saint of the blind, but I'll get more into that later in the timeline. At some point after Bathsheba's Rhode Island rope swing, her land was split up into smaller plots of land and sold off, as seen in the research that Lorraine would eventually do on the house. It would make the most sense that most of this happened when Bathsheba's widowed husband died, and while we don't have a date for that on record, it was likely in the early 1900s. With new owners of the property, the curse started to take a noticeable effect. First, a boy drowned in the river, then a maid committed suicide. The maid uniform looks like something from the 1930s, so I'm gonna guess it was around then. Not that maid outfits have changed drastically over the decades, but this seems to match most closely with the era. And that puts us at 1930, when a woman named Mrs. Walker and her son Rory moved in, but the boy reportedly disappeared into the woods. In reality, this was the work of Bathsheba, who had possessed Mrs. Walker to kill her son and soon after take herself out in the cellar. They would be the last ones to live in the house for a while, but we'll get to that soon. First, there's some drama up the coast in 1932. A priest named Father Kastner in Brookfield, Connecticut had an illegitimate daughter, which is a child born out of wedlock. That's considered a shameful act in the eyes of the church, especially for a priest. The mother died during childbirth, and since no one really knew about her, Father Kastner decided to just keep the whole thing on the down low. He would raise his daughter, Isla Kastner, in secret in an old mill. No one even knew that she existed.
Our happiness filled this house.
I believe that as much as I believe The Conjuring is a true story. And while one demon child was being raised on the East Coast, another would surface on the West. In 1936, in Southern California, the Mullins family had their first and only baby, Annabelle Mullins, who would go by B. The Mullins would have 7 years that were genuinely happy, unlike whatever projection of happiness Father Kastner was going through at that time. But sadly, this joyous period would get cut short. We'll get to that. In the meantime, 1938 was the year that Lorraine would see her first vision at about 11 years old. She describes visiting her mom at a hospital and seeing a man standing next to a little boy's bed. When she told her mom and the nurses about the man, no one believed her. She later came to believe that this was an encounter with an angel. Despite the existence of psychic visions in the Conjurverse, most did not believe in them. So while a child like Lorraine could be excused because kids make stuff up all the time, and adults claiming to have visions was reason for concern. Which is just what happened right around that time to Irene's mother, who was forcibly taken to a mental institution after trying to communicate her psychic abilities. Irene would also see visions like her mother, but instead of being sent away, she was advised by a bishop to dedicate her life to the Lord. This caused her visions to temporarily stop, but she's still sent away to a Catholic school by her father. Irene didn't know it yet, but she would eventually be a key player in the church's battle against Valak, who was contained at the time by the nuns at the Abbey of St. Carta. All of that changed sometime between 1943 and 1944, when air raids during World War II hit the country, shaking the Abbey from its foundations and cracking open the seal. And that brings us to our first official entry on the timeline. Around the same time in 1943 back in SoCal, Samuel Mullins was running his own toy company, and his daughter was now 7 years old. But she would not make it to 8. One afternoon, on the way home from church, Annabelle is struck by an oncoming car, leaving the family devastated. All they could do was pray for their daughter to be returned to them, but Malthus saw his opportunity to prey on their suffering and desperation. As we know, there are 3 stages of demonic activity:
infestation, oppression, and possession.
Malthus starts the infestation stage, altering things in the house to make it look like B was trying to contact them. Using a note, the demon asks to take possession of the doll. But the vulnerable couple eventually caught on that something wasn't right. One night, Mrs. Mullins approached the entity with a cross, provoking an attack where it mauled her face and took out her left eye. With the help of the local priest, Mr. Mullins locked the Annabelle doll away in Bee's closet, using Bible pages and, glue to seal the evil in. But just like Valak's seal, the malevolent entity could not be contained forever. Enter Janice. Born in 1944, she found herself in an orphanage, and she would later contract polio. She didn't draw the best hand in life, which made her a perfect target for Malthus, someone who would do anything to turn her luck around. What brought Malthus to Southern California in the first place is not entirely clear. We'll just chalk it up to the weather. The Mediterranean climate probably felt like home, and
maybe he wanted to be in the picture.
And speaking of movies, in 1948, back in Connecticut, Ed Warren and Lorraine Moran would meet for the first time. And it was like a scene out of a movie. Lorraine was going to the movies with a group of friends, and Ed was the ticket usher. They kissed for the first time that night under the gazebo in the rain, and stayed together ever since. We know this happened in 1948 because the movie on the marquee is The Three Musketeers, with Gene Kelly and Lana Turner, which came out in 1948. When Lorraine retells the story in 1981, she states that they were both 17 and that it was 30 years ago. But we can assume she was just approximating on the latter. It was about 30 years ago. This is actually an event that was true for the real-life counterparts. In an interview with Lorraine Warren, she shares that she did meet Ed during the summer when he was a ticket usher at a movie theater, and she was 16 years old. This was in 1945, and in reality, Ed served in the Navy before the two really started seriously dating, and eventually got married. Given this, I can see why the filmmakers would want to consolidate all of these dates, resulting in a slightly different timeline of events. The young couple must have teamed up to help people overcome their paranormal issues not long after. At some point, they investigated the ferryman, one of their earliest cases, an entity they encountered while on the trail of this missing girl.
He had silver coins for his eyes. She said his light shows you the way to the land of the dead. Just want to find my sister.
Have you ever seen the ferryman?
If you don't pay his toll, he'll take your soul.
The Warrens were able to contain the ferryman by capturing the entity on the coin purse that he used to cover the eyes of his victims. This was before they had a dedicated room to lock up their cursed artifacts, but they must have kept it somewhere safe in the meantime. While the couple was starting to make a name for themselves, there were more pressing matters on the other side of the world. At some point after escaping during the World War II air raids, Valak gained enough power that the nuns held a panicked midnight prayer session to try to keep the evil contained, during which several of them were taken out. We know that at least 2 nuns survive, at least for the time being. In 1952, the last 2 remaining nuns, Sister Victoria and Sister Abigail, were getting desperate to stop Valak from escaping and sought out the Holy Grail, a relic said to contain the blood of Jesus Christ, hoping to use it to smite the infernal creature. They venture into the depths of the abbey to search for it, but find that they are no match for Valak. The nun demon kills Sister Abigail, whose last act is warning Sister Victoria not to let Valak possess her. Victoria heeds this advice by hanging herself, thereby preventing Valak from taking her body as a vessel to escape the abbey. Because of Irene's visions, she and Father Burke are dispatched to handle the situation. After arriving in Romania, they meet Frenchie, who aids them in eventually finding the Holy Grail and resisting the demon's manipulations of reality, allowing Irene to spit the contents of the artifact into Valak's face and temporarily defeat it. Although it seems Valak has been properly resealed, the wickedness lies dormant inside of Frenchie, who leaves the abbey, allowing Valak to escape and create chaos in Western Europe. He would not be the only escapee of note that year. Isla Kastner, who we can now refer to as the malnourished lady, was now 20 years old. She disappeared from the old mill and left behind her father to join a satanic cult where she learned how to practice Satanism in secret on her own. She's a bit like Bathsheba in that her satanic worship isn't known to anyone until she evokes a curse much later. That same year, Sister Irene would move to a convent in Italy, now having completed her vows. But surprisingly, neither Isla or Valak would be the next threat on our timeline. In 1953 or 54, Janice contracted polio, which crippled her and forced her to use a crutch. In 1955, she would cross paths with the Mullins family, who had decided that as a form of penance to God for what they'd done, that is, getting conned by a manipulative Earl of Hell, they decided to open their home to orphans. We know that the main story of Annabelle creation takes place in 1955, because it's stated to be 12 years before the original Annabelle in 1967. Surely, the Mullins allowing a bunch of children and teenagers into a house where a demon is being held prisoner wouldn't cause any problems. It does cause problems. Janice gets possessed and kills both of the Mullins before disappearing, not emerging again until she popped up at St. Joachim Orphanage, where she took on the name Annabelle. That same year, she was adopted by the Higgins family, making her Annabelle Higgins, which is how I'll refer to her going forward because I don't hate myself. At least not entirely. The doll, on the other hand, was blessed by a priest who claims that it's no longer haunted.
It was a conduit for the evil. That evil has moved on.
Wrong! Malthus still has a hold on the doll, which is sent away with the police. So Malthus is kind of split at this point, partially with the doll, partially with Annabelle Higgins. In both the case of Valak possessing Frenchie and Malthus possessing Annabelle, the demons are kind of dormant within their subjects most of the time, allowing the subjects to live somewhat normal lives at times, but occasionally taking over to cause mayhem. But eventually, Valak's victims piled up, allowing the Vatican to connect the dots between Frenchie's victims across Europe. People connected to the church, who would also be revealed to be descendants of St. Lucy, died in Austria Austria and Italy that year. Then, in 1956, the murder spree continued in France. Unrelated, Father Burke kicks the bucket.
Father Burke is dead. Shit.
Once again, the Vatican summons Sister Irene to investigate. As she travels to France, her visions tell her that Frenchie is possessed. He nearly kills everyone in the boarding school he's working at, but Sister Irene is, once again, able to fight Valak off. And once again, she believes that she's exorcised Valak from his body, but once again, she is wrong. Frenchie did get married and moved to Massachusetts for some reason. Probably not to take on the Ivy Leagues considering his IQ, but Valak would lie dormant until decades later. Maybe Valak was a fan of Frenchie's new clam chowder diets. The real-life Warrens started their artifact museum in 1970, but the movie versions probably did it before that, because we see the room in 1968 and it's already filled with artifacts. In the 1960s, the Warrens investigated many cases and built up their collection of cursed items. They notably obtained the monkey with the accordion. I actually have no idea when that happened, but I just wanted to remind you that this is a vessel for an evil spirit. It was likely around this time that the Warrens traveled to Japan and retrieved a samurai suit of armor that seems to be possessed by the person who wore it in the feudal period. The real-life Ed Warren went to Japan in the 1940s and went again in the early 2000s. However, it's unlikely that he would have collected this cursed artifact without Lorraine's ability. And we see the armor in their house in 1971, so they must have made a separate trip in the Conjurverse. And I think it was probably in the early 60s after the US signed a treaty with Japan. Still doesn't explain how they got that giant suit of armor back in their luggage though. On October 1st, 1961, Lorraine Warren gives birth to the Warrens' one and only child, Judy Warren. Judy would go on to share Lorraine's special abilities, but that wouldn't become obvious until Judy was around age 10, much like Lorraine herself. On August 10th, 1963, the Warrens investigated the bride, or the wedding dress, according to the date on their case file.
The wedding dress, it haunts people, makes them violent.
This corresponds to a real-life urban legend, the haunted wedding dress of Anna Baker. Let me know if you're interested in me doing a video on that. 1965 was the year Annabelle Higgins ran away from home to join the now fully-fledged cult, the Disciples of Ram. Over the next year, they started to gain public notoriety, getting the attention of the general population and causing panic. In 1966, the Warrens traveled to England to investigate the case of Bill Ramsey, who is said to be a werewolf. That's where they obtained this book, which they used to house the Black Shuck. You would know that if more of you watched my episode on the Black Shuck. The next entry is Annabelle. In 1967, in Southern California, a married couple, John and Mia Form, were preparing to have a baby. John gifted his wife with a rare doll for her collection in the baby's nursery. Only issue is that this was that doll, the one with the demon. The Malthus in the doll and the Malthus in Annabelle were about to be reunited, because the Forms lived next door to the Higgins. On October 2nd, Annabelle came home. No, not that Annabelle comes home. We'll get to that later. Annabelle brought a few fellow Ram disciples back to meet her adoptive parents, and kill them. The cultists then go next door to the Forms looking for the Annabelle doll, and the police arrive just in time to save Mia, but not before Annabelle draws a symbol on the wall, then kills herself. It's assumed that this marks Mia or her baby as the next in line to be possessed. With the help of their priest, Father Perez, they learn that the demon is not after their baby's soul, but is using the baby as a bargaining chip to get Mia to offer up her soul instead. As John rushes home to stop his wife from doing this, their neighbor Evelyn volunteers herself to the demon to save Mia. And in an act similar to what Sister Victoria did to stop Valak's progress, she ends herself by way of the window. And gravity. You get what I'm saying? Personally, I would not do this. I'd be like, you're on your own, lady. The Malthus was back to being confined in the doll. In April of 1968, the Annabelle doll popped up in a collectible store where it was scooped up by some lady.
We looked everywhere for one of these. Never did find one.
Why? Literally why? The doll is so ugly. She gives it to her daughter, Camilla, as a birthday present. Annabelle leads directly into the prologue of The Conjuring. That spring, Camilla and her roommate Debbie experience some weird stuff. And just like he did to the Mullins, Malthus asked for permission to move into the doll, which only makes things worse. And when things get worse, there's only one number you can call. It's not the Ghostbusters, it's Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Can you help us?
Yes, we can. Firstly, there's no such thing as Annabelle. And there never was.
Actually, if you've been paying attention, there was at one point. 2 points, in fact. So the Warrens take Annabelle home with them. Yes, you can show the thing now. Realizing the power of this entity far outweighs the others stored in their house, they enlist their priest, Father Gordon, who blesses the doll with holy water and houses it in a case made of chapel glass, which I'm guessing is just glass from a church that closed down that they just decided to keep on hand in case a situation like this were to ever arise. Ed is looking real proud of himself right here. So Malthus is contained for at least the next few years. Around 1969, Father Kastner began investigating the Disciples of Ram, thinking that his daughter might have gotten mixed up with them.
It would have been about 10, 12 years ago.
Father Kastner?
This is what I consider the beginning of the Conjuring Era, where everything's in full swing and the events of the mainline Conjuring movies start to play out. In September of 1971, the Warrens got a call about a French-Canadian farmer who had a particularly bad demonic possession, and this was none other than Maurice "Frenchy" Theriault. Valak had come out in full force, and during the exorcism, Lorraine had a vision of Ed being impaled by a giant wooden spear. She was so horrified by what she'd seen, she locked herself away for 8 days and refused to talk to anybody. Probably the supernatural equivalent of "you cheated on me in my dreams." Frenchy, by the way, did not survive. Valak may have lashed out at Lorraine because she's the cousin of Irene Palmer, the demon's biggest nemesis to this point. However, it's more likely that Valak is going after both Irene and Lorraine due to the cousins being descended from the bloodline of St. Lucy. For more on that, you'll have to check out my Irene Palmer horror history. I mean, you don't have to. You can do whatever you want. The failed exorcism leaves Valak out in the open, looking for someone new to torment and possess. We'll put a pin in the Valak story for now. First, we've got to talk about The Conjuring, like the first one. In September of 1971, Roger Perrin buys the farmhouse in Rhode Island, having no idea about the property's tumultuous past. The fact that Roger bought the house from the bank makes me think that between Mrs. Walker's death in 1930 and now, no one else had owned the property, and things had remained fairly quiet as Bathsheba's curse only applies to those who try to take her land. But the Perrins were about to find out why the farmhouse was so easily available. In October, Roger, his wife, 5 daughters, and a dog all move in to their new house. But from day one, the horror would take its hold on the family. On the very first day in the new house, the youngest daughter, April, discovers a music box allowing her to communicate with Rory Walker. But each night, the family was terrorized by the much darker presence of Bathsheba, also known as Beth. By November, the mom, Carolyn, is begging the Warrens to come take a look at their haunted property. Ed and Lorraine set up shop and help the family get back on their feet, but Bathsheba is not deterred, taking possession of Carolyn as she's napping alone one afternoon. To make matters worse, Malthus is wildin' on the home front, and Annabelle escapes from the glass case, causing both Bathsheba and Malthus to attack a young Judy Warren. Ed and Lorraine get home just in time and are able to save her, and eventually Ed performs the exorcism on Carolyn Perrin. With Lorraine's help, Carolyn is able to call upon a happy memory of her family and force Bathsheba out. The witch's spirit is captured in the music box and contained in the Warrens' cursed artifact room. But not long after, the sanctity of the entire room, the demonologist couple's entire life's work, is threatened by the carelessness of a teenager. Towards the end of 1971, a father in town is killed in a car accident, with a teenage Daniela Rios behind the wheel. Daniela blames herself. In September of 1972, the Warrens left to investigate something. I'm able to determine this date because the invitations for Judy's birthday say Sunday, October 1, 1972, and this is just before that. But she's apprehensive about her big day, due to her being picked on in school for her parents' weirdo occupation. If I was 11 and had a classmate whose parents were famous demonologists, I would probably think that was pretty awesome, but there may be other factors at play. Anyway, this is the main story of Annabelle Comes Home. Judy's babysitter, Mary Ellen, picks her up from school and plans to bake a cake with her. But when her friend Daniela finds out that she babysits for the paranormal Warrens, she concocts a plan to invite herself over and use the infamous artifact room to try to communicate with her deceased father, still feeling guilty about causing the car wreck. She sneaks into the room while Mary Ellen and Judy are out roller skating. And after touching everything, she unlocks the Annabelle doll's case. Just then, a smoke alarm goes off, and Daniela has to go tend to the cake burning in the oven. Malthus is able to use this as an opportunity to push Annabelle forward and open the case, releasing himself and releasing all of the spirits contained in the room. For the rest of the night, Mary Ellen, Judy, Daniela, and local teen Bob's Got Balls Palmieri are all terrorized by different demons and spirits, including the wedding dress bride, the ferryman, the black shuck, this one TV that shows the future, a haunted feely mealy game, the samurai armor, and others. By the end of the night though, Judy returns Malthus to his case after he tries to suck out her soul with the Dementor's kiss, but the 3 girls are able to shut the glass door and
The evil has been contained.
that same year, on the other side of the country, a police officer named David Garcia is killed in the line of duty. We know this because a year later, in 1973, David's former partner states that it's been a year since he was killed.
It's been that kind of day, huh?
Week.
Month?
Year.
The timing of this particular death is significant because David's widow, Ana Garcia, works for social services, and one of her cases is a woman named Patricia Alvarez, who has 2 young sons. She would soon discover that the Alvarez family was being tormented by La Llorona. That's right, hundreds of years after taking the lives of her own children, La Llorona's curse is still active, and she's made it to Los Angeles, California. That's Hollywood, baby! I don't know what the deal is with these evil spirits all gravitating towards LA. Maybe it's a statement about the kinds of people who work in entertainment. La Llorona was able to lure in and kill both of Patricia's sons, and in a fit of grief, not unlike La Llorona herself, Patricia curses Anna and her 2 kids, asking La Llorona to go for them next.
You know, when my boys died, I didn't pray to God for their salvation. Instead, I prayed to her. I prayed.
and I prayed to her to give my children back to me and take yours instead.
While this curse is a unique phenomenon, it follows a similar pattern to demonic and supernatural activity, just like Malthus, Bathsheba, and Valak, and preys on those who are the most vulnerable, like Anna, who is a recent widow. As La Llorona starts tormenting her and her kids, Anna reaches out to Father Perez. Yes, the same Father Perez who tried to help get rid of Annabelle. He refers her to a curandero named Raphael, who used to be a priest himself, but left the church. Raphael employs his arsenal of Latin American beliefs, such as the ritual of La Limpia, to draw out the evil, and he creates a barrier of fire seeds to protect the house. However, La Llorona still gets in, and in the end, it's Anna who stabs the wailing spirit in the heart with a cross made from the fire tree, which causes her to disintegrate. For now. The Warrens' next big case was in 1976, when they investigated the Amityville horror house in New York. Lorraine experiences another vision about Valak, reminding her of the unpleasant warning that she'd had during the encounter with Frenchie.
This is as close to hell as I ever want to get.
A year later, in the fall of 1977 in Enfield, England, a new family, the Hodgsons, are struggling after their father abandoned them for a woman he had twins with around the corner. I won't get into that drama, but I will get into the effect that it has on them. Once again, a family in a particularly vulnerable state becomes targets for demonic possession.
Yeah, the timing isn't a coincidence. Negative entities often feed off emotional distress. They like to kick you when you're down.
Well, that hardly seems fair.
No, it really isn't.
It's not clear how Valak made it back to Europe again. Stay tuned for the Nun III, I guess. But when 11-year-old Janet Hodgson uses a spirit board to try to ask if her father is ever coming back, she begins sleepwalking at night and being tormented by Valak, thus kicking off the main events of The Conjuring II. The Hodgsons live in a populated area, so other people, such as police officers and crossing guards, witness some of the demonic activity. The case gets enough publicity that the church asks the Warrens to fly out to Enfield and investigate. By the time the Warrens arrive on December 21st, the girls' room is no longer livable, completely covered in crosses donated by people in town. But this time, Lorraine is unable to detect any demonic presence. Valak had hidden itself inside the ghost of a man who died in the house, Bill Wilkins, which apparently makes it very difficult for a psychic like Lorraine to detect. It isn't until they're headed back home to America that the couple would make a breakthrough. The Warrens are on their way out when Ed realizes a hidden message from Mr. Wilkins in one of their recordings.
Oh, please, it won't let me go.
They rush back to the Hodgsons, finding that Janet is in real trouble. While she's not fully possessed, Valak seems to have taken her over, and she's trapped in the house all alone. Ed is able to climb his way in, but Lorraine flies into a complete panic because she realizes this is where she's seen Ed dying in her vision. Just as she makes it into the upstairs bedroom, she finds Ed and Janet dangling out of the window over a broken tree branch that could impale both of them. Valak seems to be waiting for her and unleashes a rush of energy to pin her against the wall, but Lorraine ultimately has power over Valak.
You are Valak! The defiler! The profane! The Marquis of Snakes!
And from what we can tell, she's able to do what her cousin Irene never could and issue Valak a one-way ticket back to hell. After this most exciting chapter, things seem to mostly settle down for the Warrens for the next few years. That is, until April of 1981, during the events of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. It all started when Isla Kastner moved back to the mill in Connecticut and built herself an altar in order to enact a curse from the Strigarian. This particular curse is one that was written hundreds of years earlier that requires 3 sacrifices: the lover, the child, and the man of God. Using a series of witches' totems, she's able to fulfill the prerequisites of the curse, and in June 1981, she uses it to attempt to take control of a boy named David Glatzel. So on July 18th, Father Gordon and the Warrens are called in to perform an exorcism. It doesn't go according to plan though. Isla employs a dark magic to give Ed a heart attack, and just as things look hopeless, the boyfriend of the eldest daughter steps in, looks David in the eyes, and demands that he be taken in David's stead. Safe to say the boyfriend, Arnie Johnson, had no idea what he was signing up for. Isla, or the demon presiding over her, takes control of Arnie 2 days later, and he's possessed to kill his girlfriend's boss. He's in a trance-like state and can't explain what happened when he comes back to. The Warrens agree to help him try to clear his name, but it's difficult to prove that he was possessed during the murder because he's not reacting to their religious symbols.
Well, you're not possessed, but that doesn't mean that you weren't.
Still, they continue to investigate, and Isla realizes that they're a real threat to her curse, even going so far as to try to possess Ed to kill Lorraine at one point. The couple is able to locate Isla in the tunnels underneath her father's house, but the malnourished occultist takes control of Ed once more, forcing Lorraine to use the same move she used on Carolyn Perrin way back in 1971. She asks Ed to recall a time that he felt love, reminding him of when they first met. Ed comes to just long enough to destroy Isla's altar.
I'd like nothing more than to smash the demon's altar.
Which is the only way to stop the curse. But once this curse has started, the demon that Isla summoned is owed a soul, and it takes hers instead. Rip malnourished lady. On November 24th, 1981, Arnie Johnson was convicted of manslaughter. In 1986, he was released on good behavior. And that brings us up to date on everything in the Conjuring universe. Despite some differences between the dates of the fictional and real-world events, this timeline is a pretty clean one. But hold on, if you've seen the special features on the Nun Blu-ray, there's a segment on the Conjuring timeline. But their dates don't all match mine.
There is this established timeline, how they all piece together.
They have Annabelle creation set in 1958, but we know the events actually took place in 1955. 12 years before the original Annabelle. Annabelle is listed as taking place in 1970, but remember, Annabelle's ending leads directly into the prologue of The Conjuring, which is clearly stated to be 1968. You'd think they'd be able to get it right when so many dates are clearly listed as titles and lower thirds in their own franchise. I can see exactly how this happened too. They forgot that the prologue of The Conjuring is set 3 years before the main events of the movie, so they assumed that Annabelle was 1 year before that in 1970. Because they got Annabelle's date wrong, this threw off the math on Annabelle Creation's main story, which is 12 years before Annabelle. Rookie mistake. But at least the errors are confined to this Blu-ray special feature and don't really ruin the overall continuity of the timeline. So where can we expect it to go from here? As of recording, a fourth mainline Conjuring movie, The Conjuring Last Rites, has been announced, but very little is known about it apart from the title. IMDb does have 4 cast members announced, and interestingly, one of them is Thaisa Farmiga as Irene Palmer. So maybe we can expect Lorraine and Irene to finally share a scene together. It seems as though the future of this timeline relies on the bloodline of St. Lucy coming together. I kind of expect this to take place in the 1980s, just because every mainline Conjuring so far has come in chronological order. We know that the Warrens' time is probably limited, given Ed's health problems in the third movie, and the fact that the real-life Ed Warren died in 2006. At some point in the fictional timeline, they'll probably open up the museum to the public, as is the case in real life, and that could lead to some interesting stories. There's also a great opportunity to continue the Conjuring tradition with their daughter Judy, who demonstrated her own supernatural abilities in Annabelle Comes Home. She and her husband Tony inherited the museum after Ed's death, and it stayed open until 2018, so there's a 12-year window there to do something interesting. The Warrens also had various proteges, so there are a lot of different directions this could go. I'll continue to keep my timeline up to date, but to make sure you're caught up before Last Rites comes out, you're gonna need to see my episodes on all of the entities we've encountered so far, which you can find in the playlist on the left. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.